Hey everyone, and welcome back. I know you've all been glued to the election results, and a lot of you are wondering what a new administration might mean for your student loans. You sent in a ton of material, so we're going to focus on this NPR article that some of you flagged, which lays out some pretty interesting possibilities for student loans under another Trump presidency. Honestly, it's a lot to take in. We've got the Supreme Court already blocking Biden's big loan forgiveness plan, and now the SAVE plan, which could dramatically lower monthly payments for a lot of you, well, that's facing legal challenges too. And then there are those millions of borrowers just kind of in limbo right now, not making payments while the courts decide. So where do we even begin to unpack all of this? Well, I've got our expert here to help us break it all down.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how much is already up in the air even before the new administration takes office. We've got legal battles, brewing proposals, stuck in limbo, and just a whole lot of uncertainty for borrowers.
Okay, so let's start with the legal drama. The Supreme Court already shot down Biden's initial loan forgiveness plan. Does that set a precedent for other programs like SAVE?
It definitely raises some red flags. The court's decision basically said the president overstepped his authority, and that same argument is being used against SAVE, which, remember, is the plan that could potentially bring your monthly payments down to zero, based on your income.
Right, and right now, SAVE is frozen in time, leaving about 8 million borrowers in this kind of payment purgatory. So what are the possible outcomes here? Could SAVE actually disappear?
Absolutely. If the courts side with the challengers, SAVE could vanish, and that would mean a return to the older, less generous repayment plans for those 8 million borrowers. And even if SAVE survives this legal battle, a Trump administration could choose to phase it out gradually.
So even a win in court doesn't guarantee SAVE's future. That's a lot for borrowers to grapple with.
It really is, and it just highlights how much uncertainty there is right now. Borrowers need to be prepared for a range of possibilities.
Okay, so let's say SAVE doesn't make it. What happens then? Do borrowers just get thrown back into the repayment lion's den with no safety net?
Well, not exactly. There's the older income-based repayment plan, or IBR, which is still around. It's not as generous as SAVE, but it's important to remember that IBR was created by Congress, not by executive action. That makes it a lot harder to dismantle.
So it's like IBR is the sturdy oak tree in the student loan forest. It's weathered a few storms and might be the thing borrowers cling to if SAVE falls.
That's a great way to put it. And it's definitely something for borrowers to keep in mind as they navigate this uncertain terrain.
Okay, so we've got SAVE hanging by a thread and IBR standing strong. But what about Biden's other efforts to ease the burden on borrowers? He had that Plan B for loan forgiveness. Was working on a hardship rule, right? What's the latest on those?
Unfortunately, both are stalled. Plan B got hit with legal challenges similar to the original forgiveness plan. And the hardship rule is still just a proposal at this point. Given Trump's vocal opposition to broad loan forgiveness, it's unlikely his administration will be pushing either of those forward.
So realistically, borrowers shouldn't be counting on those coming to fruition anytime soon.
Right. It seems the focus, at least for now, will be on the fate of existing programs like SVE and IBR.
Okay, so those are the major players in the legal arena. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, or maybe we should say the department in the room. Trump has said he wants to close the Department of Education. Is that even possible? And what would that mean for student loans?
That comment certainly got people talking, didn't it? But here's the key takeaway. The president can't just unilaterally shut down a whole government department. It would take an act of Congress. And that's a whole other can of worms. Even conservative think tanks like Project 2025, which are generally in favor of smaller government, aren't calling for the complete elimination of federal student loans. They've suggested moving the program, maybe to the Treasury Department, but not getting rid of it altogether.
So maybe not as dramatic a shakeup as some people feared, but still a potential shift in how student loans are managed.
Exactly. It's more about restructuring than abolishing, which is an important distinction for borrowers to understand.
And speaking of understanding, there are about 5 million borrowers who actually did get some loan forgiveness under Biden, right? Mostly through expanding existing programs like public service loan forgiveness. Could those be reversed? Should those borrowers be worried?
That's a question a lot of people are asking. The general consensus is that clawing back loans that have already been discharged would be a logistical and political nightmare. It's highly unlikely to happen.
Okay, so some good news for those folks at least. But what about the future of those programs? Could they be shut down or changed in ways that make it harder to qualify?
That's definitely a possibility. Congress could theoretically end these programs entirely, but that's probably a long shot. It's more likely they might try to scale back the expanded eligibility criteria that Biden put in place.
So even if the programs survive, the rules of the game could change.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for borrowers to stay informed and understand how potential policy shifts could impact their individual situations.
So it's not just about whether these programs exist, but also about who gets to benefit from them. And that's where things get really interesting, because public opinion plays a role here too, right?
Absolutely. And that AP University of Chicago poll we dug up shows a pretty stark partisan divide when it comes to support for student loan relief. Democrats are much more in favor of it than Republicans.
And that divide is likely to have a big impact on how this all plays out, especially with Republicans potentially in control of Congress.
It's definitely something for borrowers to be aware of. The political landscape is shifting, and that could mean a shift in priorities when it comes to student loans.
So we've got court battles, potential policy changes, and a public that's divided on the issue. It sounds like a recipe for confusion and anxiety for borrowers.
It's understandable to feel that way.
Yeah.
But remember, even in the midst of uncertainty, there are things you can do to prepare and protect yourself.
Okay, so less doom scrolling, more proactive planning. Got it. But where do we even begin? What are the concrete steps borrowers can take right now? And what does all of this actually mean for their bottom line, for their monthly payments? We'll tackle those questions right after a quick break.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that deserves careful consideration. Here's where it gets really interesting. Even with all this uncertainty, you have more agency than you might think.
Okay, I like where this is going. Let's talk strategy. What can borrowers do right now to prepare for potential changes? What should they be thinking about in terms of their monthly payments?
First things first, don't stick your head in the sand. Stay informed. Keep up with reputable news sources like NPR that are following these developments closely. The more you understand what's happening, the better you can anticipate how it might affect your own loans.
So knowledge is power, especially when it comes to navigating the student loan maze.
Absolutely. Next, take a good look at your current loan situation. What types of loans do you have? What repayment plan are you on? Do you qualify for any forgiveness programs? You need a clear picture of where you stand before things potentially start shifting.
That makes sense. Don't wait until the rug is pulled out from under you to figure out where you're standing.
Precisely. Once you have that understanding, it's time to explore your options. What other repayment plans might be a good fit if, say, V goes away? Could refinancing be a smart move depending on your interest rates? Don't hesitate to reach out to your loan servicer or a financial advisor for guidance. They can help you crunch the numbers and figure out what makes the most sense for your situation.
So it's all about being proactive, not reactive. Taking control instead of just letting things happen.
Exactly. And this is where your personal financial goals come into play. Are you aiming to pay off your loans as quickly as possible? Or are you more focused on minimizing your monthly payments? To free up cash flow for other things, your priorities will help determine the best path forward.
It's like choosing your own adventure, but for student loans. And it might be a good time to revisit those financial goals, given all the potential changes on the horizon.
I couldn't agree more. It's like adjusting your sails when the wind changes direction. You need to adapt your strategy to the new conditions.
Love that analogy. So to recap, stay informed, review your situation, explore your options, and make sure your repayment strategy aligns with your overall financial goals.
Yeah.
Got it.
You nailed it. And one final thought I want to leave you with. Remember, the student loan system is complex and constantly evolving. What seems like a setback today could lead to new opportunities or solutions down the road. Don't lose hope.
That's a really important point. It's easy to get caught up in the doom and gloom, but it's crucial to remember that things can change sometimes for the better, sometimes even in the midst of uncertainty. There are seeds of possibility waiting to sprout.
Exactly. And speaking of uncertainty, I know a lot of borrowers are feeling anxious about what a potential shift in political priorities might mean for them. That AP University of Chicago poll we mentioned really highlights the partisan divide when it comes to student loan relief. With Republicans potentially gaining control of Congress, it's natural to wonder if things are about to get a lot tougher for borrowers.
You're right, that poll definitely raises some concerns. Democrats are much more likely to support loan forgiveness and relief measures than Republicans. So for those borrowers who are feeling uneasy about this shift in the political landscape, what words of reassurance or advice can you offer?
Well, first and foremost, I would say don't panic. We've been through periods of political change before. And the student loan system has always adapted. It's a massive program with millions of borrowers. And it's not going to disappear overnight. Yes, there may be changes. But there will also be opportunities to advocate for your needs and make your voice heard.
That's a great point. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of these big political shifts. But borrowers do have a voice, and they can use it to shape the conversation.
Absolutely. And remember, even if things don't go exactly the way we hope, there are still ways to navigate the system and manage your loans effectively. It might require some flexibility and adjustments to your plans, but it's definitely doable.
So it's about being informed, being adaptable, and being proactive. Not just sitting back and waiting to see what happens, but actively engaging with the process and making informed decisions.
That's the key. And remember, you're not alone in this journey. There are resources available to help you. Whether it's your loan servicer, a financial advisor, or borrower advocacy groups, don't hesitate to reach out for support and guidance.
Okay, that's really reassuring. It's a reminder that even in the midst of uncertainty, there are people and resources out there to help us navigate these choppy waters.
Exactly. And on that note, I think it's time to shift gears and delve into something else that came up in that NPR article. Trump's comment about wanting to close the Department of Education.
Yeah, that definitely raised some eyebrows. It sounds pretty drastic. But as you explained earlier, it's not something he can do unilaterally. It would require an act of Congress. And even those who advocate for a smaller federal role in education, like Project 2025, aren't necessarily calling for the complete elimination of student loans.
Right. They're more focused on restructuring the system and potentially moving the management of student loans to a different department like the Treasury. It's less about abolishing the program and more about changing how it's run.
Okay, so not the end of federal student loans as we know it, but potentially a significant shift in how they're managed.
Precisely. And that raises some interesting questions. Would moving the program to a different department make it more or less efficient? Would it impact the types of repayment plans and forgiveness options available? These are things we'll need to watch closely as the situation unfolds.
It's like a giant game of policy chess, and we're all trying to figure out the next move.
Exactly. And one of the key pieces on that chessboard is public opinion. As we discussed, there's a pretty significant partisan divide on the issue of student loan relief. That's going to play a huge role in shaping the debate and influencing the decisions made by lawmakers.
Right, and with Republicans potentially in control of Congress, it's safe to say that the conversation around student loans is about to take on a different tone.
It's definitely something for borrowers to be aware of. The political winds are shifting.
Yeah.
And that could mean a shift in priorities when it comes to loan forgiveness and relief measures.
So we've talked about legal challenges, potential policy changes, public opinion, and even the possibility of a major restructuring of the Department of Education. It's a lot to process.
It is. But remember, the more informed you are, the better equipped you'll be to navigate this complex landscape. And that's what we're here for, to help you make sense of it all.
Well said. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. Those borrowers who did receive loan forgiveness under the Biden administration, primarily through expanded eligibility for existing programs like public service loan forgiveness.
Right, those roughly 5 million borrowers who got some much-needed relief.
Exactly. The NPR article raised the question of whether those actions could be reversed. Should those folks be worried that they might have to start making payments again?
It's a valid concern, but the good news is that clawing back loans that have already been discharged would be incredibly difficult, both politically and operationally. It's highly unlikely to happen.
Okay, so a sigh of relief for those borrowers. But what about the future of those programs? Could they be shut down entirely? Or could the eligibility requirements be tightened up?
That's definitely a possibility. Congress could theoretically choose to end or modify these programs. Or the new administration could implement stricter eligibility criteria.
So while past forgiveness is likely safe, the future of these programs remains somewhat uncertain.
Exactly. And that uncertainty underscores the importance of staying vigilant and engaged in the political process. Borrowers need to make their voices heard and advocate for policies that support their needs.
Well said. This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, from the legal battles surrounding loan forgiveness to the potential policy shifts under a new administration.
And I think we've provided our listeners with a solid foundation for understanding the complex landscape of student loans in this new era.
I agree. Now, before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with something to ponder. With all this swirling around student loans, what can borrowers do right now to prepare for potential changes? It feels like we're standing on shifting sand.
That's a great way to put it. And the answer is surprisingly simple. Focus on what you can control.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give us the actionable steps.
First, don't just passively wait for news to drop. Actively seek out information. Follow those reputable news sources we mentioned. Dive deeper into the specific programs and proposals that could impact your loans.
So become a student of the student loan system, basically.
Exactly. The more you know, the less likely you are to be caught off guard. Next, grab your loan paperwork or log into your account and really analyze it. What types of loans do you have? What are the interest rates? What's your current repayment plan? This is your starting point for any strategy.
It's like checking your map before setting off on a journey, right? Makes sense.
Absolutely. And once you have that clear picture, it's time to think about your options. If Savvy disappears, what other plans might be a good fit? Is refinancing something to consider? This is where talking to your loan servicer or a financial advisor can be super helpful. They can help you run the numbers and figure out what makes the most financial sense.
So gathering information and seeking expert advice are key. What else should borrowers be thinking about?
Well, this is where it gets really personal. Think about your overall financial goals. Do you want to pay off your loans as quickly as possible? Or is minimizing monthly payments a bigger priority right now so you have more flexibility in your budget?
It's like choosing the scenic route versus the expressway. Both get you to your destination, but the experience is different.
That's a perfect analogy. Your financial goals are your compass. Once you know where you're headed, it's easier to choose the best path, even if there are a few detours along the way.
This is great advice. So to sum it up, stay informed, review your loan situation, explore your options, and align your repayment strategy with your broader financial goals.
You've got it. And remember, the student loan landscape is constantly evolving. What seems like a setback today could lead to new opportunities or solutions down the line. Don't get discouraged.
That's so important to remember. Sometimes it's about weathering the storm and knowing that calmer waters might be ahead.
Exactly. And speaking of weathering the storm, it's worth noting that some borrowers might be feeling extra anxious about what a potential shift in political priorities could mean for them. We talked about that AP University of Chicago poll that shows a pretty stark partisan divide on student loan relief. With Republicans potentially gaining control of Congress, it's natural to wonder if things are about to get a lot tougher for borrowers.
Yeah, I can see why that would be a major concern. What would you say to those borrowers who are feeling uneasy about this potential change in the political landscape?
First, take a deep breath. Remember, the student loan system is huge and complex. It's not going to disappear overnight, even with a change in leadership. Yes, there may be changes, some more favorable than others, but there will also be opportunities to advocate for your needs and make your voice heard.
That's a great point.
Right.
It's easy to feel powerless in the face of these big political shifts, but borrowers do have a voice and they can use it to shape the conversation.
Absolutely. And remember, there are still ways to navigate the system and manage your loans effectively, even if things don't go exactly the way we hope. It might require some flexibility and adjustments to your plans, but it's definitely doable.
So it's about being informed, being adaptable, and being proactive. Not just sitting back and waiting to see what happens, but actively engaging with the process and making informed decisions.
That's the key. And remember, you're not alone in this journey. There are resources available to help you, whether it's your loan servicer, a financial advisor, or borrower advocacy groups. Don't hesitate to reach out for support and guidance.
That's so reassuring. It's a reminder that even in the midst of uncertainty, there are people and resources out there to help us navigate these choppy waters. Well, on that note of cautious optimism, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. Big thanks to you, our expert, for guiding us through this complex topic.
My pleasure. Remember, knowledge is power. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and stay engaged. You've got this.
And to all of you listening out there, thank you for joining us. We know this stuff can be confusing, but you don't have to figure it out alone. We're here to help you make sense of it all. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and keep swimming towards those financial goals.